We're going to rank the 1975 album, one of the most influential and biggest indie rock bands from the UK in the last 10 years. You can already see Tim's face. I'm a massive fan. Tim isn't so much so. This is going to be really interesting to see in which order you put these albums.
Yeah, this is something that I've come out with not really very much knowledge of the 1975. I have been throughout their entire discography, listened to every album. Wasn't the greatest time, but I did find some bangers in there, so let's jump into it. What is your number 5 album?
So the worst 1975 album, in my opinion, is the self-titled The 1975. I think that this is the most indie rock feeling album that they've put out, and I appreciate that. But for me, a lot of the big singles that did really well off this, mainly being Girls and Chocolate, I think looking back are a little bit cringy. When I was in high school, I liked them. They were fun, and they still are fun if they play them live. But I think the fact that the band don't even play them live a lot of the time says their feelings on that as well.
I'm going to join you with that. My number 5 is a self-titled album. This is by far my least favourite, the 1975 album. It's an alright introduction to the band as they came onto the scene, but it's far from their best work. This is such a... I think the problem is that I heard it so much on Radio 1, like you were saying with Chocolate and that it's so stereotypical, the 1975 style, that a lot of people that don't like the 1975 think that's all they sound like, that it just really puts me off.
I do want to point out, though, there is still some very good songs on this. You got Robbers, you got Menswear, you got The City, and this is the album that really started off the band, booted them off. It had some big hitters on there. Instantly, from one debut album, most people knew who they were, which is impressive, but it feels very of that era and of that sound.
I was going to say, somebody who kind of got into the 1975 later might go back to this and listen to it and think this is a very dated sound. I don't think it's really stood the test of time very well. When it was released, it might have been good. Nowadays, it's pretty poor in comparison. But let's not linger around there. Let's move on to the next album. What have you got?
4th, I'm here with Being Funny in a Foreign Language, their most recent project. And many people would probably say, and I kind of agree with this, in terms of soundscape and how an album flows, this might be their best. And you can really see the Jack Antonoff production throughout this, and I think it was very polished, but maybe that's why I don't like it as much as some of their other projects.
Amazingly, I also have Being Funny in a Foreign Language at number 4. This is much more concise and refined. You can see that they've really worked on their craft with this album, but again, there's just something about it that is just lacking for me. There's just not really a huge sound going on. It feels very samey. It feels safe is the word I want to use.
I think after going from Notes onto this, the band wanted to really say, no, we can still do a more cohesive project that all fits together nicely. And this does have some good songs. I think they do a great job of creating an epic sound with About You, and that blew up around the world. And I still do like a lot of the tracks on this, but like you say, it's not got enough energy for me at all.
There is a few standout tracks on this album, but I do think a lot of it kind of falls into the realm of album filler tracks. It feels very samey. It's not really unpredictable. It's not very unique. There's not a lot of experimentation on, and I think it's a clear step towards more of a pop sound for the band.
Go on then, Tim, I'll let you give your 3rd album.
My 3rd album, this is going to ruffle some feathers, is A Brief Inquiry into Online Relationships. Now, the reason I put that there is because it's a very ambitious album. It covers a lot of stuff to do with the digital age. A lot of people kind of compare this to OK Computer, which I think is a bit unfair because Radiohead are amazing. I'm not saying the 1975 aren't, but are they Radiohead? Well, I don't know if you can compare the two. I really like this album. I thought that the themes throughout it were very good. You know, the lyrics throughout it were really good, but just something about it didn't quite hit the mark for me. I really like the experimental side of the 1975. Again, this album has a little bit of that in there, but not a whole lot.
Well, this is the first difference in our listings, because 3rd for me is a real tongue twister in I Like It When You Sleep, for You Are So Beautiful Yet So Unaware of It, which is an absolutely ridiculous title. For me, this album is where the band really found their kind of sound. Obviously, we go from the indie rock self-titled project into this, much more 80s inspired, and I do really, really like that. There's a lot of different kind of themes in there, but it's that calmer 80s, more chill vibe throughout, and it works really well for me. It is also the last album where they kind of stuck with the more old school boxy branding and art style, so it fits into a realm with the debut album for me, but I think that this is much better.
We'll move on to our number 2 picks. So for me, it is I Like It When You Sleep for You Are So Beautiful and Yet So Unaware of It, and the album title's too long and I probably butchered it. That's coming in at number 2 for me. A lot of cool vibes throughout this album. There's lots of inspiration throughout. There's some Talking Head Styles track, which I think is fantastic. And I think the 1975 are at their best when they're not being the 1975. And when I say that, I mean that first debut album. When they move away from that sound entirely, I think that's when they really shine.
But I think that this is your problem. Like you said when we were talking about the debut album, you still relate them to that initial sound that got pushed so heavily on the radio. That isn't them anymore. That was a debut album. Bands change. And as you say, I Like It When You Sleep is a fantastic example. And it still had some big hitters on there. You've got Somebody Else, which actually isn't my favourite song, but then the sound, which always goes off live, they get the entire crowd bouncing, has some of my favourite gig-related memories tied to it. So it does hold a special place.
It's a good mix between pop tracks and also showing off the kind of creative and experimental side of things. So I think it's great in terms of accessibility because it will get the fans in that like the big bangers, they like the poppy tracks, and when they're listening to it, they'll be surprised by the odd experimental track and they'll go, oh, maybe I actually quite like this stuff, which would, lead them on to other projects.
And before I give my number 2, if you are a fan of the 1975 or indie or rock music or music in general, please do remember to hit like and subscribe. All we do is talk about music, so I'm sure you'll be a fan. But number 2 for me is A Brief Inquiry into Online Relationships. I love this, and I think a lot of people would say that this should be the number 1. And I completely appreciate why they say that. This is a personal ranking for me. If I was doing it from a objective standpoint, this would probably be number 1. I did really like the political messaging throughout this album. Love It If We Made It, I Like America and America Likes Me. Some really hard-hitting tracks in there, but I think that this album, it was just the flow. You can see the band evolving in each step for me, and this really, really showed that. There's some raw emotional moments in there. I Always Want to Die Sometimes, etc. It just has so many different kind of sounds, but not quite as many as both of our number 1s. So Tim, I'll let you say it first.
Notes on a Conditional Form is the 1975's best album, and I'll hear nothing against it. I'm sorry, but this album is a work of art. I was blown away when I first listened to this album. I didn't think the 1975 could put out a piece of work like this. And I think the main thing that really lets this album shine is that it gives every member of the band a chance to really put their skills on show. It just does everything for every member of the band. Everybody's contributed to it. It sounds great. It's produced really well. It has Shiny Collarbone on there. Need I say more? That is the best 1975 track.
I'm just amazed that you just said you were blown away by a 1975 album. It impresses me that we've got to this point. Notes on a Conditional Form for me, kind of on a similar vein to you, shows everything the band can do well. You've got Me and You Together song, which is an indie bop. You've got If You're Too Shy, which is a more 80s influenced, big, grand feeling banger. You've got Shiny Collarbone, which is in a more electronic feeling, almost Chase and Status-esque song. You've got People, which is a more hard-hitting punk track. And just all that variation, as a fan of the band, getting to see each different member have their influence, have their moment and their time to shine, makes this my favourite album.
Yeah, like you're saying, there's no other album in the 1975 discography that goes from hardcore punk with People into orchestral instrumentals and then pop bangers from the 80s and then, electronic tracks, house tracks, garage tracks. It's all in there. And I think it just really shows off the versatility of the band and also, like I was saying, shows off the skills and expertise of every member really well.
And it's surprising because from an outside perspective, critically, this wasn't received very well. And I think most people that aren't a fan of the band generally don't like this. I like it, I think, because I like them that much that I can find moments in every song that I really enjoy. So it does kind of surprise me how much you've taken to this one.
Do you think a reason why it wasn't received that well by the fans was because it was released during COVID, meaning that there wasn't really a tour to go along with it?
Funnily enough, they actually toured the album before it came out. Which is weird. Okay. So it was only a few tracks off there though, and it's always seen as one of the worst things that happened is they had a big Finsbury Park gig and a few other tour dates after it released, and they obviously got cancelled. And Notes hasn't really, a few of the songs I don't think have ever been played live still, which is a real shame. But as you say, there's 22 tracks on there, so there's so much content to dive into.
I think a lot of people may call this a messy album, but in my opinion, that's exactly what makes it so special, is that it is just all over the place, but at the same time, it's cohesive. To me, it sounds like a work of art. It's just a project that works really well. And haters of this album, because I know that a lot of the 1975 fans detest this album, they just need to sort their shit out. They just need to sort their shit out, because this is a phenomenal piece of work and easily the 1975's best project.
I think that it's grown in popularity within the fan base over time. More and more people seem to be coming around to it. Well, thank you very much for watching. If you have enjoyed this video, please do remember to hit like and subscribe. I'm a massive 1975 fan, so you're probably going to see more content on them in the future.
I'm not, but you probably will see more content on them because Joe is, so it doesn't matter, does it really?
Peace.